This is our last big event at night at the Ideas Festival. Tomorrow night we have a film that will close the festival, which is very good, which one of our presenters tonight will talk about. My name is Kitty Boone, for those of you who don't know, and when we were imagining programming at the festival, we always do big ideas on opening night, and we gather the presenters that are here to talk about, to take a few minutes to talk about a big topic. And we all know that the role of women in the world is only going to increase. And while we may think that because now women in the United States exceed the numbers of men in universities, and that we're all doing really well, and maybe we're going to bounce up against the glass ceiling sooner or later and exceed it, that's not the case for most women in the world. And so I thought it would be really fun to engage brilliant women talking about really interesting issues that they deal with and think about for other women. So tonight is a number of women that think about this a lot, who are going to give you their perspectives on all kinds of issues. And it's my great delight to introduce you to this panel through our host for the evening, Monique Villa, who runs the Thomson Reuters Foundation. And I'm going to get this wrong, Monique. Say it.
Try it.
Oh, it's... I had a glass of wine, or it's really bad. Who is working on... I'm not going to get it.
Trust Women.
Trust Women.
Bravo.
That's it? Well, her conference is Trust Women. Her conference is Trust Women, but it's about women's rights, and it's about the rule of law on behalf of women. So I'm going to turn this over to Monique Villa. Thank you all for coming. This is very special. It's a little bit of experiment. We had an experiment last night with a comedy show. It was pretty good. So I think this is actually going to exceed that. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Kitty. I'm incredibly honored to be with this bunch of extraordinary women here who have been thinking all their life, more or less, of what should happen to make the life of women and girls better in the future. And so I'll be very, very fast because we want to be able to discuss with the room and to listen to the big ideas. So I will just give you the rules. The rules is that each of us will introduce themselves. So I am Monique Villa, and I run the Thomson Reuters Foundation. And then they have 3 minutes or less to tell their big idea. So we go by alphabetical order, because like there's no protocol issues. And so we start, I'm the last one, Villa, but I start first, but that's fine. So let's get started and think about the next 10 years. How in the next 10 years will the lives of women improve and prosper? What are the big ideas from women and about women that will help transform the next decade into one of real opportunity in the US and globally? So I will tell you my big idea now, and then Sallie will follow with hers. So my big idea, did you know that millions of children are invisible? As we speak now, there are 230 million girls and boys under the age of 5 whose birth has not been registered. If your birth is not registered, you don't exist for the law. 60% of these 230 million children live in Asia, most of the rest in Africa. So imagine just now if your children were denied access to school or access to healthcare, if they could not prove how old they are and who are their parents, and if you could not prove that you are their parents. So the lack of ID makes these children, the majority of them, of course, are girls, vulnerable and exposed to all sorts of evil. Among this evil, child labor, child marriage, child trafficking. We must take action. But how can you force 400 and something million parents to register their children when they are born. And sometimes these parents don't even know it is possible to register their children. And sometimes they don't even know that by registering their children, they would give them basic rights. I've been thinking about it, and I'm not the only one. Many around the world have been thinking about that to find a solution. We never found a solution because it's very per country. So I came with a big idea, because let's try to put in the same room for 1 hour some of the biggest brains of Silicon Valley. And I was thinking of that after listening the other day here to Brian Chesky of Airbnb. And he was brilliant on shared economy, etc. And I was thinking, if you put him and you put the guy who created Uber and the one who created Dropbox and many other whose popular company have transformed our life, put them in a room, 5 of them, 4 or 5 of them in a room for 1 hour and tell them come with solution about this issue. It would be very interesting to see what they find out and what they come up with. That's my big idea.
My name is Sallie Blount, and I am the Dean of the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. And I'm going to start with a story. A few years ago, my daughter Haley, after she got accepted into college, decided that she wanted to take a gap year. And she proceeded to research and craft a very impressive 12-month itinerary that was going to take her to 3 projects in 3 different countries. And as she was presenting this final plan to me, I suddenly realized that my 18-year-old daughter was proposing to make her way around the world on her own, literally. And I flinched. And I told her, you know, I'm not quite so sure I can back up this plan. And to my amazement, my strong-willed daughter didn't lash out at that moment to defend it. She stopped, and she turned to me and said, but Mom, this is what the person I want to become would do. So as you might imagine, Haley has taught me a lot of lessons. Perhaps most importantly from this moment, she made me realize that we have a responsibility to both encourage and support young women, to be deliberate in dreaming about the people they want to become. As Kitty noted, women now make up more than half of the people entering the top universities in the United States, but still only a small fraction of CEOs, board directors, and government leaders. And at Kellogg, we've identified 3 critical pivot points where we're losing women on the way to the C-suite: the launch, the child-rearing years, and the transition to senior leadership positions. And today I'm going to focus on the launch, that critical first job after college, because I've seen a lot of troubling statistics recently from Northwestern and Harvard that show that in their first year out of college, women from these top schools are up to 50% less likely than their male peers to enter the most competitive business tracks, like investment banking and management consulting. And when I look back on my own career, I now realize how important my own first job was at BCG. It set me on the trajectory that has actually landed me as the first, and so far only, female dean of a top-ranked business school. At BCG, I was imprinted in the ways of business. I developed critical problem-solving skills, and I do still know how to write a killer PowerPoint deck. I would argue that if we want our best and brightest young women to become great leaders, we have to convince more of them that their first job has to be in business. And they have to go for those big business jobs, no matter what career they want to pursue. Business is the dominant social institution of our age. And if you don't understand business, you won't be an effective leader in any sector. I'd argue that the first job is not the time to focus on comfort, balance, or even mission. That can and should come, but later. The first job is the time in their life for these women when they need to gain credentials, take risks, travel, and land as big and bold a business opportunity as they can find. So 3 years ago, when Haley, who really does want to save the world, announced after college that she was planning to go into management consulting in Mexico City, I checked the clench in my stomach, and I listened in awe as she went on to explain that she needed to understand how business works in emerging economies, how it creates jobs and wealth, and can lift people out of poverty. I can't wait to see the woman that she will become. Thank you.
Lori.
So I'm Lori Gottlieb, and I am a contributing editor for The Atlantic and a psychotherapist and the author of Marry Him, The Case for Settling for Mr. Good Enough, which is not about settling. So I had a friend who wanted a new job, and she thought she should be promoted and that she should have more responsibility and that her boss was holding her back. So she applied to job after job and kept getting rejected for an entire year. So one day, thinking that I was being a good friend, I said that she should apply for some lower level jobs because she didn't have the skills for these other jobs, and that was why she kept not getting hired. And she didn't speak to me for months. And I realized that I had made a horrible mistake. I had gone off the female empowerment script. According to the code of female empowerment, I should have joined the chorus of our other friends who told her that she was right, that her boss didn't appreciate her talent, and that she should absolutely go after these other jobs that she deserved. And when she was turned down for another position, I was supposed to say the empowering thing about how it was their loss and they were nuts to have hired somebody else. But I made the fatal error of telling the truth. Men don't do this. They don't pull this crap with each other. They just say it like it is because that's what true friends do. So here's my big idea for women. We need to stop being such liars. We lie to each other all the time, every day, in ways big and small, and it doesn't serve us or help us get what we want. We've become yes women in the most dangerous sense. Thinking that we're being supportive, we blindly cheer each other on, but how can we offer good counsel if we aren't being honest? Case in point, a colleague had been having a hard time dating, and then a male friend said to her, "You should date less good-looking guys." Now, as harsh as that sounds, this woman did just that, and the next person she went out with, she fell in love with and married. And then later, she said it was so refreshing after her female friends had led her in the wrong direction, saying that these other guys were commitment phobic, or they were intimidated by her success, or they were secretly gay, when everybody knew that was not the case. But my colleague also admitted that if a female friend had given this advice, she would have rejected both the advice and the friend. In fact, she would have gone to the others to complain, and they all would have done the yes woman thing of reassuring her that the honest friend was no friend at all. Oh, and she wouldn't have met her husband. And my other friend, the one who wanted the job, she eventually did get her dream job, but only after she took a couple of lower-level jobs to hone her skills, and only after wasting nearly 3 years applying for the wrong positions. So, my hope for women in the coming decade is that we recast female empowerment away from these kind of you go girl white lies to a much greater form of strength that comes from the ability to take in a healthy dose of reality so that we can make the necessary changes to live more fulfilling lives. Instead of a pack of well-meaning enablers, what we women really need is other women brave enough to tell us the truth.
Very good.
So I'm Jane Harman, and I'd love to say hello to the transformative men in this audience.
Yeah.
I am a mother of 4, a grandmother of 4, a recovering politician having served 9 terms in the United States Congress and survived, and now president and CEO of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C., the first president who happens to be a woman. I have a big idea and a big insight. My big idea is something we are doing at the Wilson Institute, which is to run a project called the Women in Public Service Project with a goal of 50 by 50. 50% women in decision-making public service jobs worldwide by 2050. The origin of this project was in the State Department when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, and she, working with the 7 sister women's colleges in the United States, you probably all know which they are, there are only 5 left, alas. I went to one, Smith, formed this thing together, and it is based on a training model where 50 women from all over the world go to institutes, which are now all over the world, and learn very practical skills to be in the public service business, elected or appointed. This model is not going to get to scale by 2050. Any business school dean could tell you this. So we're now transforming it to a model where we do online learning, and we are figuring out with the best and brightest, many of whom came to the Aspen Ideas Festival, how to make this work in as many countries as want to adopt it. We'll get there, 50 by 50, and that's a good start. My big insight is that as women, we always feel guilty. That's why I gave my credentials as mother, grandmother, et cetera, et cetera. Well, live with it. You're never going to get over your guilt. If you are passionate about something, pursue your passion. That doesn't mean you can't come home for dinner, you can't go to the school play, and you can't apologize occasionally to your loving and inconvenienced husband. You have to do all those things too. But pursue your passion and live with your guilt.
Bravo.
Good evening. My name is Sherrilyn Ifill, and I'm the president and director counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And my big idea is a very simple one. You probably already think you're doing it. And my idea is that you and me and all of us need to stop imposing stereotypes on girls. This year is the 60th anniversary of the Supreme Court's decision in Brown versus Board of Education, the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But so few of us realize the extraordinary role that girls played in bringing these civil rights gains to bear. It was a girl named Barbara Moten, who was 16 years old, who created, started, and managed to execute a walkout at her high school in Virginia in 1952 because of the lack of resources that her school had, no desks, no gym, etc. She embarrassed the adults into challenging the system, which became one of the first cases that later became the 4 cases involved in Brown versus Board of Education. We should remember Linda Brown, the young girl who had to walk 40 minutes across a railroad track past the white school to take a bus to another school because of segregation. And Linda Brown's father, seeing her courage walking to school every day, decided to allow that family at great personal risk to be plaintiffs in Brown versus Board of Education. Or even more recently, it was LaShonda Davis, who finally spoke out about the sexual harassment that she was suffering at the hands of a 9-year-old boy in her school in Monroeville, Georgia, which resulted in the case that held that you can bring sexual harassment claims under Title IX if a school allows a sexually harassing, pervasive environment to exist at their school. But what we see happening increasingly, particularly for African American girls, is that they're being told to shut up and sit down and pull down their skirts and not speak up. We see this in the out-of-suspension statistics that are skyrocketing for African American girls. Wisconsin has the highest rate of out-of-school suspensions for African American girls. 21% of all African American students, girl students, were suspended out of school in Wisconsin in 1 year. In 1 year. Why are they suspended? For being disruptive, for being loud, for being disrespectful. What about 7-year-old Tiana Parker, who was sent home from her school in Oklahoma for wearing her hair like mine in dreadlocks? She was told that her hairstyle was unacceptable. This is happening to girls all over this country, particularly African American girls who do not conform to the stereotype of what we are telling them girls should be. And when we do this, when we tell them to shut up, when we put them out of school, when we send them home from the prom for being inappropriately dressed, when we tell them that their hairstyle is unacceptable, we are silencing the future Barbara Motons and Linda Browns and LaShonda Davises. So trust me, you're doing it. Stop doing it. Stop imposing stereotypes on African American girls. Girls, African American girls, are loud, disruptive, confused, courageous, scared, frightened. They're girls, like every other girl. Let's see what kind of women they can become.
Good evening. My name is Joanna Lipper. I'm a filmmaker and a lecturer at Harvard University, where I teach using film for social change. I recently directed and produced a documentary film called The Supreme Price, which is screening here at the Aspen Ideas Festival tomorrow night as the closing event of the festival. The film is about women's leadership in the pro-democracy movement in Nigeria and their continued fight against corruption, a culture of impunity, and entrenched patriarchal structures. My big idea is the use of films by and about women to illuminate for women what Ralph Waldo Emerson called the attainable but unattained self. This idea involves using film to help mold and in many cases transform ego ideals that have been shaped by social and emotional violence and by internal and external pressures for women to conform with what society and overtly and covertly patriarchal cultures both value and expect. The medium of film has the power to portray women as complex, multifaceted pioneers who are pushing up against boundaries, confronting adversity head-on, making choices that are controversial and even unpopular, and charting new territory. The visceral experience of sharing a cinematic journey and a perspective of a woman who makes a bold, innovative choice and who guards her integrity and stands up for what she believes in can make that woman into an unconventional exemplar and an innovative role model for other women. Here are a few examples from around the world of this process of transformation that can occur through the cinematic medium. A study conducted in Brazil looked at the impact of television on fertility in Brazil, where soap operas portray small families. Seeing women on screen in these soap operas playing characters who were childless or had just one child influenced individual women's decisions to limit family size, particularly in women of lower socioeconomic status in central and later phases of fertility. The researchers also analyzed naming patterns and found that the names of the main characters on these soap operas increased in popularity as women viewers selected them as names for their own children. A study conducted in India looked at the impact of exposing rural women to cable television, which showed programs set in urban environments where attitudes about women's roles were more progressive. The researchers found that the introduction of cable television improves the status of women in these rural communities. Women with access to cable television reported lower tolerance of domestic violence, less acceptance of prioritizing male children, and more autonomy and lower fertility. In addition, access to cable television is associated with increase in enrollment in schools. Perhaps the researchers thought because of increased women's status as decision makers in their own households. So now to close, let's look very closely at the film and television industry in the United States. For women directors in the United States, opportunities to direct narrative feature films and television are few and far between. In 2013, just two of the top 100 grossing films in this country were directed by women. The absence of women behind the camera inevitably influences the way women are portrayed on screen in American films, the stories that are told, and the perspective these stories are told from. as well as the range of roles available to actresses. This in turn limits what women and girls watching films are able to imagine and discover for themselves through the process of identifying with characters on screen, and also what men are able to envision. We need to bring more equality to the filmmaking process in order to illuminate for women and for men what Ralph Waldo Emerson called the attainable but unattained self. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Chris Paxson. I'm president of Brown University. I'm really happy to be here. I am an economist. I've worked over my career in health and development. And I think if we had to make one investment in women and girls in the next 10 years, my choice would be to make sure that we achieve parity in secondary schooling in the poorest countries of the world. So I want to just start with a little story. In 1991, I was traveling with 3 male colleagues from Nairobi to Kampala. We were driving overland. And we stopped to buy sodas somewhere along the way. And this young girl, she must have been about 12 years old, she sold me a soda, and we started talking. And she looked over at the car and said, "Which one of those 3 men is your husband?" And I said, "None of them." And she looked very shocked. And I said, "No, my husband's at home." And she said, "Okay, that's fine." And then she said, "Do you have children?" And I said, "Yes, I have a 2-year-old child." And she looked again startled and said, "Who's taking care of your child?" And I said, "My husband." And she got this gleam in her eye, and she said, "That's the way to do it." It was just great. Sure. But, I think about that girl because she's probably in her mid-30s now. And she was clearly not in school. She was probably 12 or 13 years old. And I know the data. I know that for girls who don't go to secondary school, they are more likely to die of maternal mortality. In some areas of Africa, girls who don't go to secondary school, women have a 1 in 30 lifetime chance of dying associated with childbirth. I know that their children are much less likely to thrive, and I know that their incomes and their status in life is going to be much lower over the course of their lives. These are really grim statistics. Now, the good news here is that over the past 15 years, 10 to 15 years, across the world, we have made remarkable progress in raising the status, educational status of girls in primary schools. In most countries of the world, we are at or close to parity, gender parity, in primary school schooling, primary school attainment. And that's remarkable, that's wonderful. But the next frontier is secondary schooling, which is something that will help women delay marriage, reduce childbearing, improve their health, improve the health of their children and their families. Now, this is a big goal, and it's not an easy one to achieve. But if you look at what's happening across the world, you can see some very innovative and important solutions, ways that we're helping to create programs to keep women and girls, keep girls in school through high school. Some of these are conditional cash transfer programs, scholarship programs where families are actually rewarded for keeping their girls in school. They may be rewarded for keeping their boys in school too, but some of the most successful programs have actually rewarded families more for girls' education than for boys' education. We see examples in Mexico, we see examples in Malawi, we see examples in Cambodia, and we know that these programs work. There are huge cultural barriers to keeping girls in school, many other problems to contend with. But, again, I'm an economist. I think some of these financial mechanisms for increasing girls' schooling are very successful. I'm excited about them. I hope we see them expand through the coming decade. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sheza Shahid, and I am the CEO and co-founder of the Malala Fund. I was just saying to Chris as she sat down, and we did not plan this, that I could not agree with her big idea more. That's exactly what I was going to expand upon. So I feel honored to build upon everything that you've said. But let me begin by telling you why this matters to me. So Malala, my co-founder, is a 16-year-old child. Last year, she was shot in the head on her way back from school. She was targeted by the Taliban because they wanted to ban female education. Malala almost died. She was in the hospital for a number of days, barely clinging on. But by a miracle that we are grateful for every day, she survived and is today one of the most powerful advocates for education in the world. I had known Malala for about 6 years. I had myself grown up in Pakistan and seen women's rights attacked every single day, and at beginning, really, when girls became 12, 13, adolescents in secondary school. I eventually got a scholarship to go to Stanford and then worked in business in the Middle East at McKinsey. When Malala was shot, I left my job to build out the Malala Fund with her. What we believe is that there is no single more powerful intervention than investing in adolescent girls. If there is a single silver bullet in development, that is it. So a lot of the statistics Chris laid out very effectively for us. But imagine it this way. We see girls going to primary school more and more, and this is a huge achievement. But when you're a girl who turns 12 or 13, you're no longer in charge of your innocence. You are now an object, a woman, a sexual creature. That is when girls start getting married, raped, having children, and are trapped in a cycle of poverty. However, if we are able to keep girls in school, throughout secondary school, through their adolescence, we delay marriage, we delay childbirth. Children who are born to educated mothers are healthier, they go to school, and 90% of every dollar earned by a woman is reinvested into her community. Not to hate on the men, but it's 30 to 40% for men. So I feel validated that Chris's big idea was investing in the education and in the health of adolescent girls. That's my big idea, Malala and the Malala Fund's big idea. Thank you.
Bravo.
Tricky. I'm Pamela Reeves. I was a senior advisor in the State Department's Office of Global Women's Issues under Secretary Clinton. Now I advise the Gates Foundation on global women's issues. And I have 21 trillion big ideas, because this might take some time, because women control $21 trillion of consumer spending around the world. That's twice the GDP of China. And it's set to grow to 28 trillion by 2018. That's a lot of power. The power that women control with the private sector can be leveraged to create the kind of social, economic, and leadership advances we want to see for ourselves, for our sons and daughters, for our communities, and for our economies. And it's not just purchasing power. When women participate in all parts of the marketplace as valued workers, as skilled and connected leaders, as fully equipped entrepreneurs, as empowered consumers, we all prosper. I'm going to give you some quick numbers. If we could reduce the barriers to female labor force participation, we could increase the gross domestic product of the United States of America by 9%, and of Japan by 16%. The rate of growth of women-owned businesses in the United States has been 1.5 times the national average, employing 8 million people. And we reinvest, as Shiza just told us, more than twice the rate of men. And we put our money back into educating future generations and solving whole community problems. And from the private sector side, we've got data that proves direct correlation between profitability and inclusion. So from the board level, where we've seen boards with the greatest number of women outperform those with the fewest number of women by over 60% in terms of return in invested capital and over 42% in return in sales. And we see these correlations up through the supply chain to the C-suite. It seems to me we have them by the bottom line. So how is it, with all this control, that we accept that we're the most economically vulnerable population, even here in the United States, where 2/3 of all minimum wage workers are women, where we make 77 cents to every dollar a white male makes, and that's 68 cents for an African-American woman, and that is 57 cents for a Latina woman, and then we put that money right back into the companies and the economies that shortchanged us. Women need to take control of the power that we have, not just to get the products and the services that we want, but to force the social impact that we want to see here and all over the world. And we need to recognize that companies aren't just powerful because they make and sell things. Companies have a unique and wonderful capacity, actually, to promote and create the kind of seismic societal transformations that government and civil society cannot manage on our own. Even if we can envision it, the private sector can help us build it. Look, there are plenty of things we could do with our power. If we stopped spending for just one day, we would wreak havoc with the system. But I'm not suggesting that. Instead, I see a natural and powerful partnership between women and the private sector that we need to harness. We need to raise our voice, and we need to shape the relationship and grow it responsibly. So, when you are in your meetings, whether it's in the corporate boardroom or at your desk, say the word woman out loud often. It's an amazing thing when we remind people that we're an important part of the equation. So let's come back here in 2024 and report on the greatest success of the 21st century. That together with the private sector, we have harnessed 100% of our human talent. We have spread the responsibility and the impact of productivity evenly across our populations, and that we have created shared wealth and prosperity around the globe. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Arianna Huffington. I'm the editor of the Huffington Post and the author of Thrive. And my idea is about the fact that it is time for us to launch the third women's revolution. The first women's revolution was giving us the vote. The second was giving us access to all jobs and the top of every field. And it's still, as everybody here has acknowledged, very much an incomplete revolution. But I don't believe we'll ever be able to complete it. I don't believe we'll ever get to 50 by 2050 until we launch and succeed in the third women's revolution, which is about women saying we don't just want to be at the top of the world, we want to change the world. Because the way the world is designed at the moment is not working. It's not working for women, it's not working for men, and it's not working for polar bears. And for women to just say we want to be in the C-suite and we want to be in Congress without changing the way the system is designed by men, although none of the men present here, of course, is not enough. Nothing is really going to change. And so women need to lead the way to reimagine, first of all, what success is. Because for me, it starts with that. At the moment, success in our culture, and we've actually exported it around the world, is defined as simply two metrics, money and power. And this is like trying to sit on a two-legged stool. Sooner or later, you fall off. We need the third metric. And the third metric consists of 4 pillars. The first is our well-being. Modern workplaces designed by men are fueled by burnout, sleep deprivation, and exhaustion. And women pay a much steeper price than that. All the latest science shows that women in stressful jobs, like everybody here and here, I'm sure, have a 40% greater risk of heart disease and a 60% greater risk of diabetes. So women do not, when women don't choose to climb up the ladder, it's often for survival reasons. The statistics are daunting. That's why when I spoke at your alma mater, Jane, at Smith, gave the commencement there, I urged all the women graduates to sleep their way to the top. The second metric is wisdom. Look around. Look at all the leaders. How many of them are really wise? You know, a lot of them have high IQs, great degrees, but wisdom, that's a whole other thing. And wisdom cannot happen without time for reflection. Increasingly, politicians have designated thinkers and absolutely no time for reflection, and you see the results all around the world. And you see the lack of trust in our political system and all the consequences. Look at what happened with the financial collapse. Where were the CEOs? Burned out, sleep-deprived, not noticing the icebergs about to hit the Titanic? There was a really interesting op-ed by the woman CFO of Lehman Brothers, who wrote about how she was completely burnt out. She had destroyed her marriage. She had destroyed her private life. What she didn't say is that that wasn't exactly good for Lehman Brothers either. President Clinton himself said that the most important mistakes I made when I was tired. He did not specify what mistakes. But we need to stop walking around in the C-suites congratulating people for working 24/7. We need to stop using the language of war. We are killing it. We are crushing it. The other day, I heard our head of sales say, we need just one throat to choke. He meant just one person accountable. But do we really need to use that language? Women need to change that. The third is just wonder. You know, here we are in Aspen, but the way we've designed our work is so driven by constantly being on our devices, constantly multitasking, we miss everything. We miss the beauty and the wonder around us, and that makes us lesser human beings, because you know what? We are more than our jobs, however magnificent our jobs may be. And
Arianna, maybe you missed the beginning, but it's 3 minutes. Normally you are 4.5.
Yeah, I'm just finishing. And so women may miss that. The fourth metric is giving, because giving absolutely completes everything. So let me just end by saying that if you remember the last time you were at a memorial, eulogies have nothing to do with our resumes. Have you ever heard somebody being eulogized by saying, you know, George was amazing. He increased market share by 1/3. So let's remember that and launch the third women's revolution.
Very good. So let's start the revolution. So what I heard that I thought was the most difficult and painful was you, Sherrilyn. I mean, what you said about what happened to Black American girls at school and at university, I must say for a French person, was shocking. And so you described very well, and you said you must stop imposing stereotypes on African American girls. How do you do that?
Well, the same way we've been doing it, I think, and insisting that it be done for the last 50 years. We've shattered, I think, some stereotypes about the ability of women to have families and work, notwithstanding Matt Lauer's interview the other day. The ability of pregnant women to, you know, work in certain industries, the ability of women to participate at the highest level of athletics. Think about all of the stereotypes that in our own lifetimes we've been able to more or less dislodge. And I guess I'm suggesting that we need to be attentive to this same set of stereotypes as it relates to girls across the board, but particularly to African American girls. And I think it's an important window in, because the stereotypes we impose on African American girls harm all girls. The idea that you're supposed to be quiet, that you should give someone else a turn. You know, when I was a young girl in school, very ambitious and driven, teachers would always say, "You're so aggressive." And I don't know that that's really what they meant. I think they meant opinionated.
But
even
if
if
not
I
only
was,
for Black, it's
all
for
girls.
everybody.
As
soon as you have an opinion, you are aggressive.
My point exactly. And that's why I think this window into the consequences that exist for African American girls, though, who are suspended at rates higher than girls of all other races, and some boys, because of those same gender expectations that are imposed on these girls. And I think that the first thing we have to do is recognize we're doing it. And the second thing we have to recognize is that it's work to be done. It takes affirmative work to overcome stereotypes. And the same way we put that as a priority for us as women, we need to put as a priority for girls.
Yeah. Sorry? Okay, so I have plenty of questions for all of you, but I think the room is waiting to ask questions to many of you. So I will ask, do you have a microphone to distribute? So this lady here.
Thank you. I have a question I think I'll address to Pamela or to anybody else who'd like to answer it, because you mentioned women on boards. We know that there, in many European countries, the percentage, if you will, of women on boards is now mandated, like legally mandated. In other countries, it's perhaps strongly recommended. Now, I don't live in the United States, so I'm not really familiar with the laws and regulations here, but I would like to ask, what is the situation? Do you see that, that the number of women will be at some point legally mandated? Or do you prefer to see it that somehow this happen organically, although I'm not quite sure how that would happen organically, but would just like to get your views on that. Thank you.
Sure, thank you for asking that. You're talking about quotas, or what we call quotas on boards. And it is true that there are other countries that have mandated these quotas. And in fact, Christine Lagarde of the International Monetary Fund recently said, I used to be against quotas, but now I'm becoming for them. Because it is sort of the way to jumpstart or to shot in the arm getting women involved at levels that they haven't been able to reach. And she's actually has been very funny about this, though it's a serious subject. One of the issues about women on boards that board directors often say is, well, I can't find any women to put on my board. And she said she used to pull out of her pocket a list. And the issue about women on boards, there are many issues about why women are not on boards. Boards tend to be self-perpetuating. Men know other men. There is a real dearth of networks, so that there's no pipeline. Women don't have networks the way men do, though that is something that many people are working on, including Ernst & Young is doing some good work with networks right now. But the question about quotas in the United States, so that's really anathema to the way we view our system. To mandate exact numbers is something that really is not going to happen. And I cannot guess anymore what the Supreme Court is going to decide. But that's not something that I think they're going to look favorably upon at any point. And it's, we're a capitalist and democratic and open society like that. Is it my preference that more women get on boards? Definitively. There is a lot of research that shows the real benefit of diversity on boards with, as I mentioned, profitability, with return on investment, and invested capital and return on sales. The Catalyst has done tremendous work on this. And I will stop because I know you want me to. But no in America, yes, women on boards, 2024.
Françoise Giroud, another French woman who was a minister but also a journalist before that, said the day women will have won is when a totally incompetent woman will be appointed in a very important job. Finally, we will be equal. I want a man now. A question by a man. Yeah. Because of course, women take power from the men, so we have to convince them that it's a good economic thing and everything else.
So as the father of 2 and 3/4-year-old young lady, as she would define herself, I wanted to just put, in 20 seconds, 2 more ideas on the table. One is to encourage all of your male colleagues, your nephews and husbands, to lean in to being fathers. There are tremendously important roles that dads play. I took 3 months out of my daughter's first 6 months alive off, and another 3 months at 18 months, and it's been amazing to build that relationship. And the second is, when you see young ladies, little girls, do everything you can to resist complimenting them on how beautiful and cute and adorable they are and how cute their clothes are. Look to have meaningful conversations with them. It would really help.
And keep these compliments for the boys. Next question. Another man. Because we are many women to speak, so I don't see why they would not speak also. No. You will. So we have a question or not?
I just have a question of those of you in the media, Arianna. lagging in all of the media seems to be lagging in all of this, driving change.
I don't think the media is lagging. I think the media is covering everything. I think the media needs to do a better job at putting the spotlight on achievements. Not just putting the spotlight on what is not working, but what is working. And the achievements of women in so many different areas, not just in business and the more traditionally male examples, but also like we look at what's happening with Teach for America, when we have a long list of very smart women and men because they want to make their life about something that is beyond their own success. So I think the media needs to do a better job at putting the spotlight on all that.
I want to say one thing about the media since I'm a journalist. Oh, is my mic not on?
Yeah, it works.
Oh, okay. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Teach me to wear halter tops on panels. So I'm a journalist, and I think that one thing that's been actually positive in the media for women is that a lot of topics that were considered very soft are getting really good play in the media. So a lot of what I write about might be considered women's topics, parenting, relationships. They get on the covers of The Atlantic. They get on the cover of the New York Times Magazine. So I think that in the past, these things would not be considered serious enough for that kind of placement. And you'll see that they end up being sort of the most popular articles read that week, not just by women, but by men too. So I think that's one of the very positive things that's happening in journalism as more women get into the editorial ranks.
Yeah, absolutely. The lady here.
Okay. Although all of these ideas should be implemented immediately, how can we accomplish this when women can barely have the right to their own body with abortion and having the right to go up to the authorities if they get raped and get a rape kit done if they would like it? Because women can barely have the right to their own body to get an abortion or birth control. So.
Who wants to answer this American question?
Those are all very serious problems. One of the reasons we need more women at the decision-making table is so that these policies that exist get repealed and the right policies for women's health and women's advancement get enacted. And let's just understand one thing, because I hate this word. These words. There's no such thing as women's issues. All issues are women's issues.
Can I just say something? Can I say something about that question about because I don't want to let that go, because we just had a really terrible Supreme Court decision in this Hobby Lobby case, and I want to sound the alarm about it. So you're asking that question, and that's a question that could have been asked 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 40 years ago. We should be embarrassed about that. We should be embarrassed that you're asking as a young woman that question. So what that means for us is that we have to be attentive to battles, and I deal with this in the area of race discrimination as well, battles that we thought we had won. And we cannot get so comfortable as we kind of move and enter into and become entrenched in the middle class and are going to find ways to get access to the reproductive health care that we need and the other kinds of health care that we need. We cannot forget that this continues to be a real battle for real women who are entitled, just as we're entitled, to have the integrity of their physical bodies. And so we can't make it as though those are just things of the past. We have to be willing to talk about those issues, to advocate for those issues. We should not let another presidential debate happen without these issues being asked every debate. I mean, all this power, we're always talking about this potential power, these trillions of dollars, and we can't control our own bodies. So we have to make a decision whether we're real about this or not. And if we're real about it, then it becomes front and center, along with all the other issues that we have to deal with. But we recognize it's not something of the past. No narrative is permanent. You have to keep winning it over and over again. And so we have to decide that we're still engaged in that battle.
We're on the mics on the first row here.
You can project.
Now here.
Or I can talk into the mic. So this question is really for anyone on the panel. I loved all the ideas about big ideas and change for 2024. I'm wondering, sort of coming right off of what you just said, are there things that you feel like we're doing now that we shouldn't lose? Are there things that we can continue? Because I feel like sometimes as activists, we're always on to the next fight. And I just want us, I'm curious to hear from you to take a moment and say, okay, what's gone right? What do we want to continue and keep up?
Well,
So, I think the fact that we're all here has gone right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we've made tremendous strides in a number of areas, and that we're having this dialogue has gone right. But I think none of us are willing to rest on those laurels, which is why we've been so focused on the next step.
And I think another thing that doesn't go right with every woman, but goes right with every woman on this panel, and it better go right with all of you, is the obligation to help younger women coming up the ladder. Women who don't help women, according to Madeleine Albright, and she is right, deserve a cold place in hell.
So if here,
I have the mic.
ah, you have the microphone.
Yeah.
Okay, so you are very strong.
I've been waiting for this moment. Okay, so I'm going to start off with some data or statistics, whatever you want to call it. According to the census, in the year 2012, we had, throughout the whole history of the U.S., we had 35 female governors. But this, for men, it was almost to 10,000, which is a disgrace because all men are created equal, which is like the first statement in the, I can't talk. But I want you to know, I want you to talk about this. What have the U.S. done wrong? Because we have had 35 governors. And Canada and even Pakistan have had higher amounts of female in their legislation than us. And we consider ourselves to be developed. But how can we be developed if we do not have the 51% of women being in our legislation?
When I was in Congress, I was one of 300 women over 230 years who'd ever served in Congress, and there were 12,000 men. It's the same statistic. It's never going to become equal unless we wait another 230 years and elect only the talented people, women, to Congress. But the goal is certainly to have us, the amount of women in public service reflective of our place in the talent pool, which is over 50%.
Yeah.
Shiza, thank you for being here. It's an honor.
Thank you.
There are, and the work that Malala is doing is so universal for this world, and to do it at such a young age is so empowering. Somewhere around 12 million girls live in refugee camps. With what's going on in the Middle East right now, hundreds of thousands of children and girls are going into refugee camps. What wisdom do you have for us who are here in such an amazing place, are so blessed, on how we could be more responsible in saving the lives of those young children?
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. I'm honored that you've said that. You know, we were just in Jordan in Syrian refugee camps, and Malala herself was a refugee in her own country for a while. And I saw everyone who was there break down as we watched hundreds of people cross the Syrian border into Jordan on foot with no possessions, just the shoes that they were wearing, a couple of blankets because it was cold in the desert. And it really is one of the most disturbing tragedies that we are seeing, and it's not just Syria, it's South Sudan, and it's not just South Sudan, it's North Waziristan in Pakistan, and again you see refugee situations that make women's rights come under even greater pressure. And it is in these situations that women come under sexual violence, greater domestic abuse, greater isolation. I continue to believe in the power of trying to give those women a way out through skills, through learning, through education. When there is war, men are killed. Women and young boys become the only breadwinners. And out of that situation, if women are educated, you can see them then earning, protecting their family, and starting to have power in a very, very difficult situation. And I think this comes back to, a lot of what we've said on the panel, how far have we come, what do we have to keep doing? And the reality is the battles that are being fought within the US are so important. But fighting for women's rights can never be limited to within the borders of a country, because we're all so connected. And what happens in these refugee camps will influence women's rights in the US. And really keeping that in mind as we fight our battles and as we apportion our time to different issues is so important.
So, and if I may add that 3 million refugees from Syria since 3 years who don't go to school. So it's a whole generation that is impacted by what happens in Syria. This is absolutely dreadful.
Well, refugees are on average refugees for 17 years. So those of us who believe aid is blankets and food need to rethink what we mean by helping refugees.
The lady here? One or the other. Don't fight.
I suppose my question might be first off maybe for Jane, but also for anybody else who wants to jump in. You are all so incredibly inspiring, but I and probably most of the people in this room are not necessarily the women who need to be inspired. It's the people who aren't here. I'm the vice president of the National Women's Commission up in Canada for the Liberal Party, which is sort of our Democrats. And my job is to recruit 50% women candidates to run in the next election. The hardest time I have is not raising money to help these women overcome the financial barriers to running. There's plenty of men and women who want to help by giving their time or their money. The problem I have is actually convincing women that they are qualified and capable to run for these positions, or that it's something that they want to do. How
Maybe
can
they
we
prefer
fight this
to be in
battle?
business, as it was suggested here.
Yeah, and I guess my question is, how can we fight this battle when women ourselves, we don't necessarily have the gumption or the confidence or perhaps even understand why it's important for us to take up that space and put ourselves in that position?
So the reason I care so much about getting more women in entry-level jobs in business is because that's how you build confidence, and that's how you build an understanding of how the world works. I don't want them all to end up there necessarily. I want them to end up in all sectors of society. But the fact that we're opting out before we even start, to borrow from Sheryl Sandberg, the best and the brightest of this generation is opting out before they even start, how are we going to get there? And that's why we have to be pushing, even in this room, from the very beginning, your daughters, your granddaughters, push them to take big jobs. It's that simple. There's a starting point, I'd argue.
And I just want to add that whether it's finance or politics or really anything, you can't, these are overused words, so think about them deeply and what they really mean. You cannot underestimate the power of mentorship and networks. When a woman feels, when anybody feels they are not alone, that there's a critical mass, that somebody cares, that when they fall on their selves, that somebody's going to pick them up and they're going to give them advice, it makes all the difference in the world. It's very serious. And this is true all the way up to the CEO level. So really think about it. I mean, it's not just being nice to other women, which, as Jane points out, is critical. But it's really also taking them under your wing, talking about them to other people, and saying, I'm in this too. I know another woman who's in it. Let's get together. That it doesn't exist the way it exists for men.
Getting together to do it in different ways. I was talking to 3 young women in their 20s who are at McKinsey. They've just graduated from Oxford, really smart. I was in London when I had this conversation, and they said to me, we went to our bosses after being there for 6 months, and we said, we are going to work really hard during the week. We'll do amazing work. We are taking our weekends off. If you need us, here is our cell phone. You can call us or text us. That was a bold move. That was against consulting culture. That was against investment banking culture when you're supposed to be on all the time. 3 months later, their boss's boss went to them and said, you've been identified as leaders in this company because you set up boundaries about what works for you, and within these boundaries, you've been doing an amazing job. So I think that's what I'm talking about, women leading the third women's revolution. They don't have to do it the way men did it, because the way men did it is not working.
looking around the room, I think I see more than a few fellow women who worked before the days of affirmative action professionally, and I know a number of you did as well. I almost feel like there's almost a bit of an elephant in the room, and I was so pleased when this young man mentioned about being a Mr. Mom and his role. I think something that is really surprising is the degree to which there's almost more chauvinism out there in some ways, and particularly as women are getting more successful and some men are actually feeling threatened. And I've always subscribed to the premise that if you want a successful man, have an educated mother. Now, what are we not doing with the mothers, and what are they not doing with their sons? We're talking about daughters. We've got to talk about sons. Yep. We also have to not make men seem like the enemy. It's so important that they are included in this too. And so I would love to hear some anecdotes or initiatives that are really focusing on bringing men in as much more part of the solution and the advancement rather than the problem.
You know, in many countries, but notably in Africa, where you have, you know, always this story that it's cultural. So we do FGM because it's the culture in the country, etc. And FGM being the cutting of girls. In some countries, it's men who have been first convinced that it was a bad thing, and that in their village, because they have the maximum influence, have convinced the women to stop doing it, etc. So there are plenty of examples of that, of men empowering women. But you're very right. The education of boys is at least as important as the education of girls. Absolutely everywhere in the world. And in Pakistan, as in Haiti, as everywhere, as soon as a boy have respect for a girl and he learns that at school at the youngest age, then the society will change. Yeah. You need a microphone.
Where are we?
Here, on the first row.
Hi. The one word I have not heard is entrepreneurship. Starting your own businesses. You control an enormous amount of money. Why in this panel did no one mention starting your own businesses?
Okay, so I did mention women-owned businesses. I did not specify entrepreneurship, but it is true that women are really the engines of economic growth in the United States, in other countries, and in the developing world because they're entrepreneurs, these small and medium-sized enterprises. And I will tell you that there is a lot of work from the biggest companies, financial institutions, on entrepreneurship for women. You've got Goldman Sachs, you've got Ernst & Young. I don't mean to exclude anybody, but I'm on a panel and I can't think so clearly. But there's so much work being done because we do recognize the power of a woman entrepreneur. I just want to add a little caveat here. I'm for entrepreneurship and I'm for women's entrepreneurship. There are those who say entrepreneurship for women is opting out of the system in which they cannot compete. Okay? There are those who say that. Now, I would argue that, as we've said in other ways, and we've talked about this from the audience as well, that whoever said we had to do it their way, right? So yes to entrepreneurship, a lot is going on, and there are incubators in the United States for women entrepreneurs. There are technology companies that support women entrepreneurs. They mentor them, they give them equipment. I mean, it's really, there's a lot going on, and you're absolutely right, so thank you for bringing that up.
Can we go a little bit further, which is Bangladesh, where 40 years ago, BRAC and Yunus, both BRAC, which is the biggest NGO in the world, and Mohammed Yunus invented microfinance. Right. And they decided to first give microfinance to women. And today, Bangladesh, 40 years after, 30 years after, as the second garment industry in the world after China. Why? Because all these women which were given the possibility to do something, an enterprise, sent their girl to school. The girls then went to cities and built this garment industry. So investing in women, it's not new, and the example doesn't come from the US here, it comes from Bangladesh, for once. Yes? We have one more question. One more question, so here.
Thank you very much. Just one quick thing to the lady over there. I'm a child of a single mom, and my grandmother and my aunts and my mom was 19 when she had me. She taught me one thing: don't take any crap from anybody, because she was stronger than 90% of the men that I met. And I think that every man in this room should be proud to be a feminist, because it's not just a women's thing to be a feminist. Congresswoman Harman said it really well. A women's issue is everybody's issue. But one of my questions is this. Why is it that in developing worlds, whether it's Rwanda with their high percentages of women in their parliament, or Sri Lanka, or Pakistan, or India, or whatever the case may be, why is the developing world, which we look at from the West as so backwards, doing a better job of getting more women in head of government roles than we're doing in the West?
Up to a point, Lord Copper. You want to answer?
I mean, in Pakistan, it's dynasty, right? I think it's important, as much as I think it's important to amplify the voices of incredible women in the developing world, changing their communities. In Pakistan, it's dynasty. And Benazir Bhutto, who was the prime minister, was the daughter of the two prior prime ministers, Bhutto. And her daughter, who I met, who's a lovely girl, very smart, very bright in Oxford, I was with her last week in London, will probably go into politics and succeed. And I remember when I was 19 and trying to change the world, I interned in government and faced severe sexual harassment, and there was no way I could have gone up the ranks. So just to say it is not as rosy as it seems, and it's not always for the right reasons.
But there's a lot of variation across countries. So in India, there's implicit reservation systems for women in local government that do the quota thing, which is difficult in this country, but has shown success in other places.
But that's the whole point of the 50 by 50 project, is to give women skills, not just parents who've been in politics, but personal skills to learn issues, to gain self-confidence. It is a special problem for women, gaining self-confidence. Many women opt out, and it's a shame. We lose an enormous amount of talent. But to gain the skills, and including not just the substantive skills, but the grit to keep at it when things go wrong, to win elections, and then, as it has happened in 20 countries around the world, to become the heads of countries. Just maybe we'll pull that off in the United States of America in 2016.
On this world, I think you had the last word. Now you want to give the last word.
I just want to say one thing, which is that, at least in this country, I'm not sure that women are not confident. I think there are lots of confident, smart women who are making other choices, in part because we've made politics look so darn unattractive. If you had anything on the ball, and if you are smart and you want to make a difference in the world, then maybe you are doing Teach for America, or maybe you are going into business, or you're going into civil rights, or you're. I think we have poisoned the well so much that we have made this look like an unattractive way to change the world, to have a family life, to make a living. You know, we talked about all the different men governors. You know, we've had governors who hiked on the Appalachian Trail. They can be all kinds of different people. But for women, the kind of scrutiny that they know that they're going to face, the kind of way that we've hardwired the political system to be a system of personal destruction, if you're a woman and you have something on the ball, maybe you're just not up for that. So I think part of not because you don't have the grit, but because you think, why bother? So I do think that we have to take responsibility for the poisoning of our political system that actually is repelling both women and men who probably would be the best and the brightest.
It's the same in France, it's the same in the UK, it's the same
That's even worse then, but yeah.
Politics is less interesting. 20 years ago, you had all the students, the brilliant students, who wanted to go into politics. Yes. Since then, it's over. They want to go in business.
That's right.
And so, to your point. Okay, thank you very much for a fantastic evening.